Good morning and welcome to Mount Vernon Unitarian Church. My name is Mike Walker, and it is my pleasure to welcome each and every one of you to our service this morning. This is our opportunity to honor and acknowledge our veterans. So a special welcome is in order for each of our veterans, as well as each of our veterans' families. Welcome, everyone. This is our last virtual Zoom service. And so a special thank you goes out to the women and men who have effectuated our online services lo these many months, particularly Joanne Masterson, who has served as the conscientious coordinator for our devoted and dedicated volunteer staff. Remember, next week, we'll be back in the meeting house, live and online. We'll continue to broadcast online for those who are unable to join us in person. Now, to come to the meeting house, you must sign up in advance, and details will be provided in the newsletter attached to today's email Zoom link, as well as next Wednesday's This Week newsletter. So for now, we ask you to turn off your microphones and video and turn your hearts and minds to today's service.
Company in all the world, the company of those who have known suffering. When it seems our sorrow is too great to be borne, let us think of the great family of the heavy-hearted into which our grief has given us entrance, and inevitably we feel about us their arms, their sympathy, their understanding.
Like as the wind upon the field, bows every
that there is something for you to do in this world. So long as you can sweeten another's pain, life is not in vain.
We light our chalice this morning in recognition of the sacrifice that men and women have made on our behalf. Those 19 million living men and women who served in uniform to defend our liberty. Memorial Day honors the dead, but today we honor the living.
Please join us in singing hymn 103 for all the saints. For all the saints who from their labors rest, who thee by faith before the world confessed, thy name most holy before
success in the well-fought fight. Thou in the darkness deep there won true light. Alleluia, alleluia. O blessed communion of the saints divine, we live in struggle, they in glory shine, yet all are one in thee, for all are thine. Alleluia, alleluia. And when the strife is fierce, the conflict long, steals on the ear that distant triumph song. Then hearts are brave again, and arms are strong. Alleluia.
Let us join our voices in the covenant found on the screen and in your heart.
Love is the teaching of this church.
The quest of truth is its daily task, and service is its prayer.
To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom.
To serve life in community, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony.
This is our covenant with each and with all.
I'll Lend You My Daddy, written by Becky King, illustrated by Valerie Valdivia. I'll lend you my daddy. He works for us all. He keeps the world safe and answers our call. I'll lend you my daddy. He serves us, you see. He's going away, but he'll come back to me. I'll lend you my daddy. He's ready to go. I'll try to be brave, but I'll sure miss him so. I'll lend you my daddy. It's hard the first night. Dinner without him just doesn't feel right. I'll lend you my daddy. My mom reminds me daddy must help so our land can be free. I'll lend you my daddy. There's a lot that I do. There's soccer, gymnastics. He's missing this too. I'll lend you my daddy. It seems like so long since he's read me a story or sung me a song. I'll lend you my daddy. My birthday is here. I'm still a bit sad. My father's not near. I'll lend you my daddy. I'm feeling so blue. Mommy comes up with something to do. I'll lend you my daddy. I know what to make. I'll send him a package and some of the cake. I'll lend you my daddy. His gift is complete. A letter, some drawings, and Dad's favorite treat. I'll lend you my daddy. I wave happily. He adores all the goodies and pictures of me. I'll lend you my daddy. He hung what I drew. It reminds him of home. He's missing me too. I'll lend you my daddy. Although we're apart, we're always a family, close to his heart. I'll lend you my daddy. I mark off each day. It won't be that long till he's on his way. I'll lend you my daddy. With markers and glue, I'll make a great banner in red, white, and blue. I'll lend you my daddy. I'll cheer for him, proud. When he arrives, I'll stick out from the crowd. I'll lend you my daddy. I'm lucky, you see. All of his bravery has passed down to me. I'll lend you my daddy. My heart's beating fast. I jump in his arms. I hug him at last. I'll lend you my daddy. By air, land, or sea. He's a true superhero who protects you and me. I'll lend you my daddy. I'm sure you'll agree. Now that he's home, he belongs just to me.
Mount Vernon Unitarian Church continues to share the plate with committed organizations that you, our members, have chosen. During the month of November, our offering is being shared with No Child Goes Hungry, a nonprofit dedicated to the elimination of childhood hunger, one kid, one meal at a time. With funds donated by churches, private organizations, and individuals, No Child Goes Hungry works with faith communities and other organizations to alleviate hunger on a local level. I invite this gathered community to offer whatever you are most comfortable with in financial generosity for the mission of our church community. If you would like to write and mail a check for the offering, please make it to MVUC and in the memo line indicate how you would like it to be used. You can also follow the link in the chat box or in the order of service or on the screen to make a one-time or recurring payment. During this time of music, we invite you to name in the chat box or silently as you wish the joys and sorrows that you hold within your heart.
French composer Maurice Ravel, at age 38 and 5 feet tall, was too old and too short to serve in World War I. He did drive an ambulance, and he lost many friends in that war. He later wrote a 6-part tribute to his dead friends, dedicating each movement to specific dead soldiers. Our prelude, our postlude, and now this piece you're about to hear are tributes to these dead soldiers. During our reflective piece, dedicated to Jean Dreyfus, I urge you to list your joys and concerns, as well as your veterans, in the chat box below. Mount Vernon Unitarian Church has many veterans of our armed forces. Here are some of their stories.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dick Toy, and I served in the United States Air Force for 27 years, and I'm honored to tell you a bit about those years and the great folks I served with. I entered the Air Force after my 1959 graduation from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. My wonderful wife and I were married about a month thereafter and celebrated our 62nd wedding anniversary last July. During our time in the service, we've been stationed overseas in Spain, Germany, and I alone in Korea. In the US, we've been stationed once in Mississippi, once in Alabama, once in Boston, and many times in the Washington, D.C. area. My last base assignment was at Grand Forks, North Dakota, at the 321st Strategic Missile Wing, where I was responsible for the operation of a large number of ballistic missiles, the Minuteman III type. After my Grand Forks assignment, we returned to Northern Virginia, where I was stationed at the Pentagon as part of the JCS's Nuclear Negotiation Division. I was in the chief of that position, and I was responsible for all of the military advisors to the US delegations to the Strategic Arms Reduction Talks, START, to the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, INF negotiations, and from time to time, discussions with the Soviets on nuclear weapons testing. My folks and I briefed the Joint Chiefs of Staff almost every week for the last 4 years before I retired. I also spent a fair amount of time in Geneva across the table from the Soviets. As an aside, my old missile wing, with all of its missiles, was eliminated when the START Treaty went into effect. So I've seen nuclear arms control from both sides. As I close, let me emphasize what top-notch people we have serving the country in uniform and what top-notch families we have with us through thick and thin. The families and the children move every couple of years. They sometimes have their mommies and daddies go away. Many cases, more often, the military member does go away by himself, and the remaining person has to be most all the time, mom and dad. Also, Uncle Sam doesn't really take into account school years, anniversaries, family reunions, or other milestones as people are reassigned, often to foreign lands. And with heartbreak, remember also that some of our families suffer the loss or grievous wounding of loved ones. The military family is the bedrock of those in uniform. When we celebrate our military, celebrate also their families. Protecting the United States is a team effort. Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
I'm Ron Grant. I'm classified as a veteran by the US government, but I'm no hero and I've not sacrificed very much. Michael asked me to tell my story because he thought it might add balance to the term veteran. My military experience included classes at the University of Nebraska before active duty, and afterwards several years of evening meetings and summer camps. But the main thing was 2 years of active duty. I was in a program called ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Corps, and I was a commissioned officer. Although in the 2 years I spent at Fort Dix, New Jersey in the 1950s, I had very little to do. The ROTC program, which still exists but is different now, of course, was established to develop a ready supply of officers who would be quickly needed if our country got into a war. That's how lots of young men, they were only men at that time, served our country, partly because ROTC was required for all male students, but mostly because I needed the $60 a month I was paid in my junior and senior years. I was also paid reasonably well for my 2 years of useless service. And because I am now officially a veteran, I'm eligible to receive medical care through the Veterans Administration. I might explain that the reason I had so little to do in 1955-57 was that the Korean War had ended with a ceasefire, but no treaty in 1953. If the war had broken out again, as seemed very possible at the time, I and the other lieutenants would probably have been sent to Korea, and I would have a very different story to tell. As it happened, though, my military service was never very dangerous and was well rewarded. Ron Grant.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Dan Cohen, a retired military veteran and a storyteller. Today's story is sad and yet, I believe, inspirational. If someone had told me 50 years ago that I would become a military officer, I would have thought they were crazy. I was a medical student during the Vietnam era, protesting against America's flawed policy. I was against everything military, though admittedly, I knew very little about the military. I was naive to a very considerable extent. When I graduated from medical school, the military draft was still in place. And in order to avoid the draft, which would have disrupted my medical training, I accepted a commission with the United States Air Force. I could complete my pediatric training and then provide care to the children of service members rather than being sent to Vietnam. The draft, interestingly, ended in 1973 while I was still in training, but I was already obligated. Go figure, couldn't get out of it. A 30-year career later, I'm proud of my service. I made some real differences as my career advanced from clinician to academician, to operational roles and to leadership roles, culminating as Chief Medical Officer of the TRICARE health system, providing care to over 8 million service members, family members, retirees, and spouses, a health plan larger and more complex than Kaiser Permanente. The U.S. military is an arm of U.S. foreign policy as directed by civilians elected or confirmed to leadership roles. You know this. The military does what it's tasked to do, and the people who serve in the military do not get to choose which military operations they participate in, some including risks of injuries and even death. They are serving their country in ways that are measurable and palpable, without expectation of personal gain. Sacrifice and service to country before self. There are substantial risks to a military career, and not just for service members. Family transitions encompassing frequent moves both nationally and internationally, compromises and disruptions for spousal careers, frequent school and friendship changes for children, and of course, operational deployments for service members. These are the attributes of a lifestyle that the vast majority of Americans never, ever experience. For this, we should all be very grateful to the service members and to their families. In 1991, as part of the Gulf War, I was deployed to Kurdistan, to an area encompassing parts of Turkey and Iraq. I was the commander of the sole U.S. military field hospital deployed to support the Kurdistan refugee emergency, when nearly 3 million people fled to the mountains and valleys of northern Iraq to escape Saddam Hussein's army. My hospital staff was primarily supporting multinational forces, but also became deeply engaged in medical support for the displaced Kurdish people. There was a lot of violence, though officially the Gulf War had been declared over. There were the environmental traumas of a frigid winter and then a sweltering summer heat and dehydration for people living under parachute canopies, landmine explosions, pestilence, outbreaks of dysentery, sandfly fever, malaria, cholera, and measles, and psychological trauma. Oh, and the occasional Katyusha rockets flying overhead. Not 4th of July fireworks, I assure you. I spent some time hunkered down with a unit of U.S. Army Special Forces, hanging out in 100+ degree heat, dining on military rations, digging holes for toilets, trying to avoid stepping on scorpions that might crawl into my boots overnight and swatting mosquitoes that I hoped were not carrying malaria. As part of this joyous experience, I got to talking with soldiers. And you know what they wanted to talk about with the senior doc in the theater? They wanted to talk about their partners, spouses, and children. They wanted to know that their families were safe and cared for, while dear old dad was in a hellhole facing violence and uncertainty. These soldiers were implementing the foreign policy developed by the civilian leadership of our country, while the leaders were perhaps dining out at nice restaurants with their families and friends, safely far away from the front lines where violence and injury were the norm. And not just physical injuries, because when soldiers return home, they're often plagued by memories, images, and smells of violence and fear and loss of control. We call these post-traumatic symptoms, some of which I have personally experienced. Emotional wounds heal slowly, and sometimes not at all. One afternoon, a soldier whose vehicle had exploded on impact with a landmine was brought into my hospital with extensive, near total body deep tissue burns. And also a Kurdish refugee who, after picking up a landmine, was brought in with his abdominal wall and intestines and half of his neck and face blown off. We lost both of them. The next morning, I was interviewed by CNN and asked how I felt about President Bush's comment that the Gulf War was finally over. I replied, well, with all due respect to President Bush, my recent personal observations do not support such an optimistic conclusion at this time. So when I think about Veterans Day, I focus on the losses and the unrealized dreams of those who have served and in many cases suffered or died, and on the family members who have struggled with the transitions and sadly with their losses. Veterans Day sobers me, a former Vietnam protester who now understands more clearly what sacrifice and service to country before self means, and most importantly, what patriotism really means. Thank you for listening.
Jesus is quoted in John 15:13 as saying, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. I have seen it in action." I am a veteran of the war in Vietnam and Cambodia in 1970. I served as an engineer terrain reconnaissance sergeant in an air mobile division, which routinely assaulted by helicopter. I served with men who were in the main 18 and 19 years old, Black, brown, white, and Asian. We were urban and rural, poor and middle class. Some men had college, many were high school dropouts. For the moment, though, for the time we were together, we were brothers. We endured sleeping in the mud together with one staying awake to guard the others. We grumbled at the bad food and the Dear John letters and the stupid orders. We suffered rocket attacks, mortar attacks, mine trails, snipers, and a few times all-out ground attacks. We assaulted the enemy. We patrolled behind his lines. Sometimes we killed him. Sometimes he killed one of us. We quite literally ran for the sound of the guns. It is a strange thing to think about. How many people do you know for whom you would willingly risk death? And whom do you know who would die for you? I carried an unconscious man once during a rocket attack at night in the rain, and a rocket landed near us and knocked us both into a trench full of water. I didn't like him. He didn't like me. But what I did was done for love. The Army calls it small unit cohesion and defines it as the bonding together of soldiers and their leaders in such a way as to develop and sustain their commitment to the unit and their resolve to accomplish the mission. I call it love. I call it a love which you have never known except from your immediate family, and which you will almost certainly never assume from mere circumstances. I have to tell you that my brothers who died not for the flag, not for their country, not for glory, not for pride. They died for me. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes was a combat veteran of the American Civil War. In his 1884 memorial address, he ended by saying, "But grief is not the end of all. I seem to hear the funeral march become a paean. I see beyond the forest the moving barriers of a hidden column. Our dead brothers still live for us and bid us think of life, not death, of life to which in their youth they lent the passion and glory of the spring. As I listen, the great chorus of life and joy begins again. And amid the awful orchestra of seen and unseen powers and destinies of good and evil, our trumpets sound once more, a note of daring, hope, and will. St. Paul said, "Love never fails." It has not failed me.
Like most of our recent presidents from Clinton, Obama, Trump, and Biden, I never served in uniform in the armed forces. During the Vietnam era, 1970, my draft lottery number was a dangerously low 33. But I had a privileged college deferment, and by the time I was finishing college, the war effort was winding down, and I never got called up. Nor did any of my 16 first male cousins on both sides of my family. None of us went to Vietnam. None of us were drafted. Today, it seems rather odd to be wearing a shirt made in Vietnam, made by the hands perhaps of someone who was our enemy or a child of our enemy. And certainly it would have been rather subversive to buy and wear such a garment 50 years ago, but times change. My dad and his brothers, his 6 brothers, all served in uniform, as did 4 of my mother's brothers. All came home safely. The one uncle who served as a tail gunner in the Pacific, where he was shot down multiple times, could never bring himself to wear a necktie. His family said that the post-traumatic stress, the memories of feeling as he was being shot down in a parachute, were that he was being choked. They were still too vivid. PTSD is a horrible thing to experience. Now, my mother had a good childhood friend from her neighborhood, George, who did not come back from the war. He was in the Navy, and at 19, he was declared lost at sea. I can't imagine being the parent or a brother or someone lost at sea. I never met George, but I heard a lot about him during my youth. I thought about him when I visited the memorial to those killed in the Pacific Theater on Corregidor Island in Manila Bay. They planted beautiful eucalyptus trees and have a beautiful memorial to the many people who were lost at sea. War is hell, from the people in uniform to the families at home. Now, we honor veterans who have paid the ultimate price on Memorial Day. Today, we observe Veterans Day and honor and thank those men and women who serve this country in uniform. As Unitarian Universalists, we seek peace and a peaceful world. The sixth principle of our denomination speaks of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. We often sing of peace. We have taken principled stands at General Assembly to oppose the development of strategic missiles, to defend police departments. Another was to abolish customs and border protection. We seek peace. But curiously, our denomination, even the Unitarian Universalist social justice effort, seems to have paid little effort to the challenges and roles and extent that the military plays in our society, the amount it costs in tax dollars, and even the mistakes the military has made. Military expenditures today are higher than ever, representing more than 10% of the total federal budget, over $700 billion. That's about $2,200 for every man, woman, and child in the United States. Is that too much given other needs? Are we getting our money's worth? Do we look the other way because we call our military machine the Department of Defense? Would it be different if we still use the term United States Department of War as we did for hundreds of years prior to 1947? Are we a warlike country? Or do we rationalize our activities as being the dispassionate police officer to the world? Can we support our troops but question control of the military and its leadership and large budget? The only general ever to be elected president during the 20th century, President Dwight Eisenhower, a man who clearly saw war for what it was firsthand, warned the nation in his farewell address about the co-opting influence of what he called the military-industrial complex. Are we being co-opted? Do we get a true picture of how things are going from our military leadership? Is the leadership of the armed forces out of control? Recent experience in Afghanistan suggests this might be the case. And if you look at Iraq, Iran, Benghazi, Vietnam, we're cautioned to follow the science on COVID and climate issues, but what about our military industrial complex? Should people of faith, including Unitarian Universalists, take a more responsible, conscientious assessment of government military activities? Rather than worry about proper pronouns, should we more conscientiously pay attention to the military-industrial complex? Our recent experience over the past year illustrates some of the challenges we face. First, Joint Chiefs of Staff General Milley. He unilaterally seemed to break protocol and chain of command and take control of the military from a sitting president, even calling his counterpart in China to tell them that the United States was not a threat and would not be attacking during the ensuing few months. Then there's the Afghan drone strike in retaliation for the 13 Marines who were killed at the airport in Afghanistan. Some serviceman authorized that drone strike, and some serviceman made an assessment of the science, of the data that led to that drone strike. And some serviceman or woman deployed the weapon. 7 children were killed, along with their father, who was working for a humanitarian aid organization delivering drinking water. An accident? Yes. How tragic. Military leadership called it collateral damage, unavoidable, an accident. Our tax dollars are now being offered to the survivors in compensation for their loss. So here we are, Unitarians with our 7 principles. Can we support the troops but challenge the war and the leadership? There's a strong history of pacifism among Unitarian Universalists, and that is worthwhile. Interestingly, within the past few decades, 3 Unitarian Universalists have served as U.S. Secretary of Defense. Elliot Richardson during the Nixon administration, William Perry, and William Cohen during the Clinton years. John Behrens, past president of the UUA and a minister of the First Parish in Needham, Massachusetts, points out that there have been very different approaches to the use of military power at different times in our own religious history. Early Unitarian John Murray was a captain in the Continental Army. Julia Ward Howe wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic as an anthem for the Union Army during the war between the states. And President William Howard Taft, he served as a moderator, a leader of the American Unitarian Society, and he presided over the General Assembly in 1917. He led an effort to support the World War I war effort as a defense of democracy. Interestingly, several ministers who took principled pacifist positions during World War I lost their pulpits. In 1918, the Unitarian Society Board of Trustees issued a statement that any society that employed a minister who was not willing to support the United States in the war effort cannot be eligible for any aid from Boston. In 1936, the board issued an apology saying that the 1917 statement was contrary to the fundamental principle of freedom through thought and conscience. So can we, as a matter of conscience, support our troops, but criticize the leadership, civilian, military, and political? We live in an era of global terrorism. We and our allies face serious threats. And yet our ability as citizens and voters is tempered by our ability to accurately assess these threats from our comfortable living rooms. Thus, we face the prospect of funding standing armies of men and women in Germany, in South Korea, men and women on the high seas and below, and guardians of our defensive missiles in silos in Nebraska, where in an ideal world, silos should only be filled with grain and soybeans to feed a hungry world and not nuclear weapons. The men and women who wore and wear the uniform stand sentry for our defense and safety throughout the world. And today we honor and thank them. May we wish them safety and offer our heartfelt thanks.
Good morning. Please join us in singing hymn 159 from your gray hymnal or from your screen.
Song of peace for lands afar.
Will you join me as we unite our voices to recite the words to extinguish our chalice, words known within our hearts and can be found displayed upon your screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
19 million living American men and women have earned status as veterans. Their work and their sacrifice has earned our thanks and respect. Our country offers veterans a safety net of medical care and support, yet approximately 20 veterans die each day from suicide and the burdens of post-traumatic stress disorder. May we support with empathy our veterans as we go forth this day.
Feel free to turn on your video and audio. Hi, Zoe, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it says I can't start the video
Yep, I had the same problem.
because the host has stopped it.
It's okay. Please try again. It should work.
just give us a moment for the settings to change. Linda, could I might have made you host prematurely.
That's fine, sweetie. I'm good.
I need to no, but I need to cancel. I need to turn off the YouTube recording, so I might need to be host again. Let me see if I can take it back. All righty, I'm just going to take care of it.